Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kyle Stutzer, and guess what? We are back at it again with another episode of the Voices of Value show. I know it's been a few months. We've been in transition from Kansas City to LA, work, meeting new people, establishing new connections, trying to get situated in our new home. But the finale is here. We are back with another conversation with yet another fire guest, as I always tell you guys. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce Nick to the show. Nick, go ahead and introduce yourself, share, where you're calling in from today, and let's do it what do they call it? What's that thing when you guys do? Oh, icebreaker. We'll do a little icebreaker question. So, Nick, tell us where you're calling in from. Icebreaker question is, what city did you grow up in?
Cool. Hey, I'm Nick Gammell. I'm calling in from Vancouver, British Columbia currently. And I've also lived in Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, a bit of everywhere. But hometown is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So go Steelers.
Wow. All right. Well, fun fact for you, Nick, my brother. So I have many siblings, but one of my brothers, for some odd reason, has had an obsession with the Pittsburgh Steelers since he moved to America. So the Steelers are his favorite team, and is the only reason you'll ever see me wearing Pittsburgh gear or buying Pittsburgh gear. Outside of that, Kansas City Chiefs over here, we have to celebrate being 7-0, I don't know, undefeated, but but no, I love it. Thank you for making time to come on the show today. Our audience is really just a lot of young professionals, young entrepreneurs looking to, I would say, new entrepreneurs, individuals who are looking to get into business, looking to learn more about what it is to be an operator, what it is to be an entrepreneur, what it is to be a founder. So with that being said, can you maybe share a little bit about what kind of sparked the interest to build? I'm just going to call it build because entrepreneurship and founder, the words are used far too often. So what sparked the interest to just become a builder and provide, some sort of value to the world? When did that happen? When was the first business?
Yeah, you hear a lot of these entrepreneur stories like I was selling bubble gum when I was 12 years old. I don't have that story. Both my parents are public school teachers. And so I didn't grow up really around much business background or influence. Um, I was very fortunate early in my career, my second job out of university to work at Google. And that is where I really got inspired. At the time, it was 2006 when I started there. And, the company had gone public, but it was still quite small. I think there were 8,000 people I started. And right after I started, they acquired YouTube, which was its own, back in the day, its own startup doing its
Yeah,
own, thing.
yeah,
And while I was at YouTube, I got a chance to work with some really influential, some of the founders, including Chad Hurley. I also got to work with some of the early product leaders on the Google side, like Marissa Mayer and Salar Kamanger, kind of credited with inventing the AdWords auction.
yeah.
So working with these people, they were young, they were maybe early 30s, they were smart, and I just felt some influence. Like, hey, I'm young, I'm smart. They did it, I can do it too. So really was inspired by some of those brilliant minds I got to work with.
I love that. I love that. And, when people think about, one of their first, 1 to 3 first jobs out of college, Google oftentimes might be a goal, but it's not necessarily an opportunity everybody gets. So what do you remember about how you felt? You're a young guy, you're coming out of university, you're excited for what the world's about to bring you, but also maybe a little bit afraid. What was that feeling like when you're like, okay, I've secured this position? And what was like the culture or the feeling around Google at that time? Do you remember it being like, we still don't know if this thing is going to work? Or was it like, okay, we're established, this is big, this is going to continue to grow? But just talk a little bit about how you were feeling and, where your head was at going into that.
Yeah, they'd certainly established the company had been successful already, but it was this sense of like, I would say the people leading it were not super experienced. And my previous job was in consulting firm, and there it was like there was a steep hierarchy. You sort of put in your time, you did this 3 years at this level and 4 years at this level, and the people at the top were the very seasoned people. At Google, it didn't have that sense of hierarchy or didn't have that sense of experience or tenure being the important thing. It was more of a sort of meritocratic culture.
Mhm.
So, they would have taken a 16-year-old whiz kid programmer out of high school and put him in charge of, some critical search algorithm features if that was, the smartest, best person. So there's definitely a sense of like just self-confidence in your own intellect, kind of at any age and experience level, and a sense of, yeah, just, lead with your ideas, lead with your execution is very, uh, that company tended, especially at that time, brought together just like all the overachievers
Yeah.
from every high school across, the country and the world. It was people, and they valued things like, were you an athlete? Were you a scholar outside of just like getting good, doing good academics?
I love that.
So yeah, really just well-rounded people that were kind of like leaders by nature and lead with your intellect and lead with your execution.
Yeah, like the way you just described Google at the time and the type of people it attracts kind of reminds me of like, or makes me think about cities like LA, New York City, Chicago, London, cities that really attract like I don't want to it's a lot different than like a company because that really genuinely attracts a certain type of people, but people who are really ambitious, who are looking for more, who are excited to test out new things. When you think back to 2006, 2007, what other companies at that time would you have also been excited to work for? So Google at the time is a company attracting a lot of young minds. They prioritize, intellect. They prioritize like your effort and your skill sets. What other companies out there, if you reflect back to that time period, do you feel like would have had that same type of energy? I just think it would be fun to talk about that real quick.
Yeah, you know, it it was kind of a weird one that kind of reemerged out of the dot-com bubble burst as a company that was still standing. Yahoo was sort of its biggest competitor at the time, but they didn't have that sense of cachet. They still had great people, really smart people. Microsoft also, was a company that had hiring standards and smart entrepreneurial people, but it wasn't quite at that same level. I would say in the years following, 3, 4, 5 years later, I was still in San Francisco, and this was when I was doing my first startup after Google. There were companies like Lyft and Uber.
Yeah.
There were companies like Airbnb, and those were then the companies that they had some, like everyone knew they had something. They got the best investors. They were fast growing, and that those became the companies that attracted like those entrepreneurs and those sort of ambitious people, free thinking people, and obviously like very founder led companies for the most part as well. So it's sort of almost the dogma of the founder being that young, confident in their own abilities, disbelieving of things like hierarchy and traditional structures and organizations that kind of attracted crews of people that were kind of similarly minded.
I love that. Yeah. I think you mentioned a few people who stood out to you at Google as, influential leaders who you feel like you learned from, were inspired by. But before we talk about those individuals and maybe some skill sets or some insights or, experiences you picked up from working with them, I'd love to talk about like early life. So Pittsburgh, born, you're let's say 5, 6, 7 years old, like who were some influential people in your life at that time that kind of maybe guided you in the direction of whether it was consulting or, maybe the route you kind of took out of high school?
Yeah, yeah, fun question. So just a quick bit of context. I grew up in a family with five. I had two brothers. My dad was a lifelong athlete. He was a high school baseball, basketball player. He played basketball in college. He's always a big tennis player. He became a tennis coach. And so it was surrounded in, kind of physicals. Lots of sports were big, competitive with my brothers, with the neighbor kids. Um, So it was just like always very active. And yeah, the second part of that is, sorry, one more time.
Yeah, no worries. Just like within that, like within those people you grew up around, your siblings, your parents, I was just wondering who were some influential leaders at that
Oh
time of
yeah.
your life? Yeah.
Yeah. So at that time, like putting myself back in there in my driveway, shooting basketball and riding a skateboard down my driveway. The first one that came to mind is Bo Jackson.
I love it.
Bo Jackson, I mean, obviously being a sports fan, but I really admired not only was he an incredible baseball player, but he played football. Very tragic how his career ended,
Yeah.
as a side note. But just, seeing those players, and even later, I remember one of the most memorable Pittsburgh Steelers that I always really admired was Slash.
Mm,
Um, he was Cordell Stewart. So he was the quarterback that also could play receiver, that also return kicks.
dual athlete.
And
Yeah.
there was something about that versatility that at the time I wasn't thinking about business at all. I was a student, I was an athlete. I was just admiring these athletes. But now that I think back on it, as a business leader, there's something about that versatility, especially as an entrepreneur, that I really try to embody in my own life. And yeah, I never even made that backward connection, but it seems like there's something there.
I love that. And it's so important. I think one thing a lot of listeners right now probably should really think about before they enter the business space and try to launch something is you're going to have to play a lot of different roles early on, right? And, here in a second, we'll have you share what that was like for you, but you're going to have to play a lot of different roles. You're not going to be able to have the money right out of the, bucket to be the hire a marketing director, hire somebody who's running brand, hire somebody who's helping you figure out how to like price your product, hiring somebody to figure out how to like do financial model. Like, you're going to have to figure out how to do all of that at the beginning. And with that in mind, and the topic of versatility, let's kind of maybe jump into the first business you co-found, and talk about the versatility you had to have during that building period. So feel free to just jump right in there in terms of first business you co-founded, and talk a little bit about the versatility and the relevance of that word during that time period of your life.
Yeah. So the first company, the initial name was called eFit Plan, which was very descriptive. It was a digital first fitness plan generation application. The name, when we got a little bit more smart about it, became Gain Fitness. And I mean, that's the first example there of like getting into like a brand marketer's headset. What is a good way to name a company that's easy to talk about, that Google search engine optimization, what keywords are available, conflicting. There's like a legal side to conflicting intellectual property, copyrights. You have to check very quickly in the naming of a company. You have to become like a multi-positional switch hitter just to kind of get that right and do that well. And I often see kind of the flip side. You often see a lot like if we had gone with eFit Plan as the name of the company, which again, it was fine, it was descriptive. It's boring. It's not exciting. It's not very memorable. It's dated. That wouldn't have been a relevant brand 5 years later with the E in front. That would have been a bad decision. But as an entrepreneur, like you have to just get up to speed quickly. You have to think kind of multidisciplinarily. And if
Absolutely.
you don't have these skills, you just find something that does, and ask for advice. Like people are out there, people are accessible, and if you don't, I'd say first and foremost, you have to develop that skill of like being resourceful,
Mhm.
and call it pitching, but just being able to convey, hey, like I need this or I'm looking for this to anyone out there. It could be a lawyer, it could be a marketer in a diverse, mind space, and knowing and being efficient and effective at asking for help.
I love that. I think that's a really important point, which leads me to kind of a follow-up question to that. Just being in a lot of different spaces or um, just yeah, the easiest way to say it is spaces where young entrepreneurs gather to either share their ideas, or maybe it's just there's a panel on a certain topic. It's free, and so all the young entrepreneurs in the city, I'm speaking directly about Kansas City personally, but come to these events at this place all the time. One thing I saw a lot is, I mean, there's no better way to say it, or no kinder way to say it, and some people are just like annoying.
Yeah.
So as when you reflect back to being a young entrepreneur, for others who are listening to this right now, like there's a difference between like just keep on poking somebody, asking questions, like being like, hey, can you help me with this? Or like, can you join my board, even though I don't have any idea what a board is or what my business is about? Talk about like
Hmm.
how I guess younger people could make better decisions around building connections and relationships and being resourceful with like human capital, if that makes sense, but not in an annoying way.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say first, I think everyone should develop their own style. I've heard people talk about developing your own voice, is one way to think about it, but maybe you're really energetic, maybe you're super kind of intellectual and reflective and thoughtful. But figuring out like this is sort of my personality, this is my style. That's important, and that just gives you sort of the confidence. And then within that, it's fairly like basic, just human etiquette things like be respectful, try to be empathetic. Like if someone's really busy, put yourself in their shoes. Like you probably don't want to be fielding, a barrage of additional questions. So yeah, just be thoughtful, be respectful. Try to put yourself in their shoes, and yeah, do it in a way that feels authentic and genuine to you. And I think a lot of, for me at least, I know you hear this with some entrepreneurs, but it's sometimes there's like mixed guidance about this. I feel really fortunate that I was able to find something I'm genuinely passionate about and make that what my business is. Um, I'm sure there are people that are genuinely passionate about multi-threaded infrastructure, AI backend problems, but for the most part, you know, some people do businesses because there's money and there's an opportunity. I was fortunate to do a business that aligned with my own personality, my own values, and something I really cared about a lot. And through that, I think a lot of passion just naturally came out because I felt very aligned. Like what I'm about is what my company is about, and vice versa. And so when you're coming from that place where the foundation is really solid and aligned, I think it tends to come across better when you're reaching out for help and advice.
I love that. With like the same, advice or guidance you just gave there, like what did that look like for you at Google? So there were three names. I'm not going to act like I remember them, but at the beginning of this conversation, there were three names that you mentioned of some leaders who were in their early 30s, but they were inspiring and they were hardworking at Google. Who were those individuals, and maybe what are some lessons you learned, or maybe how did you find yourself interacting with them and trying to learn from them in that part of your life at Google?
Yeah. So one was Chad Hurley, the founder, one of the two co-founders of YouTube, and that was particularly strong connection for me, partly because he grew up in Pennsylvania, also just halfway across the state, and he had a brother as well. We just had kind of relation about where we came from, and I just saw him as I remember I didn't meet him right away, so I moved over to work in the YouTube building like a year or a year after I started at Google. And he was the founder, he was the CEO, he had some cachet around him, always very busy, maybe hard to get a meeting with, and somewhat intimidating. But I remember, I don't know, I just at one point for some reason had a chance to go into his office. I had some topic to talk to him about, and I was just struck with how much of an entrepreneur he was. He was just thinking about, something came up and he's thinking like, what's the scalable idea here? Like, what's the solve here? Not just like, hey, I'm the founder and CEO of YouTube. This is my company. Like, what do you do? There's just so many different ways I can imagine someone in that position to be like. But he was just a consummate entrepreneur and sort of always thinking of in that way of mind, even though he'd sort of like made it by, many different people's acts and accounts. Um, Contrast with some of the other leaders. So Salar Kamanger, for example, was like soft spoken, not particularly boisterous, not particularly excitable, fairly even keeled, but just so smart and like so crisp in the way that he thought, and sort of framed his ideas. Yeah, obviously, Google, just the brain power of many of the people at that company is just through the roof. But yeah, he is a person that really embodied that sort of like cool, quiet, well thought out, considered confidence, and just inspiring from like a just brain like inventor kind of prototype.
I love that. I love that. There's some things you've mentioned about sports growing up and sports and fitness being a early part of your life. You talked about like the characteristics embodied by some of the leaders at Google, and for some reason, it's just making me think about like LeBron James aura, Kobe Bryant aura, Michael Jordan aura, um, Barry Sanders aura, Troy Polamalu aura, like all these different athletes. And I don't know necessarily what your favorite sport is, but when we think about athletes, in the past 20 years, who are some individuals who, like, when you watch them play, when you hear them talk after a game, or when you see them win a championship and you hear their speech after the fact, like who are some of the individuals who like really stood out to you as like, fuck, that just got me excited, like I just want to go build something right now, I want to go speak to my team and like empower them and fill them with energy, like that just filled my cup? What athletes come to mind?
Yeah, I mentioned a couple of them already for the skills. Just thinking about the persona a little bit more. One that came to mind is Charles Barkley, and he's obviously Michael Jordan is Michael Jordan, who is such a just performance based leader. Charles Barkley was, I would just say, he's like a little more scrappy, where good player, skilled player, not the most athletic, not the most highly skilled. He just sort of had this like rawness about him. It was a little bit sloppy. It was a little bit ragtag, but he just had like such a passion that he exuded, and a little bit of just feistiness, um, scrappiness. And I sort of like that. I sort of like that ethos, and I feel like that's a good, I don't know, just something as someone who's leading a team. I feel like it's easy to rally around that kind of like scrappy, get things done. Let's kind of think outside the box a little bit, and I wouldn't say play dirty, but just like let's get it done kind of mentality. So that's another one that came to mind.
I love that. And you've founded a company with, I believe, if I was reading correctly, over a dozen employees. You've been a part of building and managing, high performing teams. How much of the energy or the characteristics you just mentioned about Charles Barkley, how much of that manifested itself in how you were operating and building, your first two companies, and maybe try to describe what that looked like? I can only imagine how much stress and how much pressure can be on your shoulders when there's, 12 or more people plus the millions of customers that may or may not be using your app yet, but will be using it or have used the app. Like, how did that energy, or what type of mindset needed to be created in order to like operate under that pressure?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the first thing that came to mind, it was just in the earlier days of Gain Fitness. I would be in the office I had with roughly half a dozen employees at that time, and just kind of in a very raw like bursts of energy, like go to the whiteboard and just like whiteboard stuff out. Like this is the idea. This is the next thing. Like let's add this thing next. And I sort of as I've aged and matured, I sort of look back on that time as seeing myself as a bit immature and maybe not like my peak leadership phase, because yeah, there's a little bit of sloppiness to it. There's a little bit of like, okay, we said we're doing this, now we're kind of shifting because this is just how you're thinking today or feeling today. It's not maybe super diligent. You're writing everything out, documenting things thoroughly, but um, there's something about being like a first time entrepreneur, a young entrepreneur. It's willing to take big bets, willing to really follow intuition, swinging for the fence. That some of the times, these are the companies that end up becoming the Facebooks and the Airbnbs of the world. So I can both like respect that early, kind of rough and raw version of myself at the same time as I can sort of, criticize a bit and think that I've at least matured through some of those types of behaviors.
I love that. I love that. So we're gonna kind of like swing to the right a little bit, which is when we think about Facebook, when we think about, or should I say Meta, whatever. Either way. Anyways, Facebook, when we think about Instagram, WhatsApp, Twitter, these are like some of the huge names in the social app space, or social media, entrepreneurship, whatever it might be. But let's just say social app space. When we think about apps and these digital products that have blown up in the fitness space, what companies come to mind? Like what at the time for you, I don't even want to say at the time, but even today, like what companies stand out as like, all right, these companies are on the Mount Rushmore of fitness products or fitness apps. I could mention a few that come to my mind, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, yeah, I will say I'll say four that come to mind for me. And some of them are in a little different sphere. First one is Peloton. I think they're, probably the one most people would think, but and I've, mixed reviews about them over the course of their tenure. The second company I started was actually a Peloton competitor called Mix Fitness, MYX Fitness, which eventually merged with the SPAC and Beachbody and IPO'd during pandemic. But that company, because I was sort of doing this similar company, I was looking at Peloton, I was reading all their analyst reports, I was really following the company and the CEO for a long time. And, we were trying to beat them and we are trying to differentiate from them and all that stuff. But the one thing I can say out of respect for what they did as a company is that they're the first really like tech forward fitness company. And I make this distinction all the time. Part of my business now is I do consulting. So I'm a digital consultant to a lot of larger companies, fitness companies, and startups as well. And we're always breaking down the competition. And one of the key factors in breaking down is often like these are fitness first companies or these are tech first companies. And Peloton was the one company that really did a pretty good job of sort of being both fitness and tech first. I think there's a lot to say for that.
But before you actually move on, because that's actually interesting to me, like from a like maybe get into a little bit more detail about how you differentiated fitness first versus tech first. Yeah, what you were saying right there. Just maybe a few more details for us to understand how you would process that or evaluate that.
Yeah, so over the course of my consulting career, which has been going on 5 years now, that's been my primary focus. I've worked with kind of the range of fitness companies, from equipment companies to gyms to studios, and some sort of media-driven fitness companies, certification organizations. And I would just say that having come from Silicon Valley and Google in the tech startup world, and then working directly, sometimes internally as a consultant, sometimes externally, there's just a different way a company thinks and operates. And I generally like to refer to these as like core capabilities. But for example, a fitness club, and there's different fitness clubs. There's sort of low cost ones and high premium ones. But in general, fitness clubs tend to be quite operational businesses where they're thought about as, really tightly managing like costs, being really efficient with costs, and then, revenue is sort of capped because you only have so much space. There's only, so many people that live in this in, 5 mile square radius. So there's like a very, I say, operational mentality for typical like fitness club business. If you go to a media company, we had a media company that's a big fitness media based in New Zealand for a couple years during pandemic, and they were exceptional at creating like amazing video content. They created workout programs for other trainers. They choreographed things to music, created some of their own music, and the video production that they were able to do and the sort of fitness programming and production combined was unlike any company I'd ever experienced working with. Switch over to sort of like the tech world, and being a tech startup founder, also had lots of friends that are tech startup founders, coming out of Google and all that, just being in San Francisco those years. The way a tech company thinks is often, well, you kind of think in code first and you think in scale first, and everything you do is like a very thoughtful decision, because in software, I always think about it as like software can do anything. The possibilities of what you can do with software are infinite. So even when you have a particular platform, you have a particular company and domain, you could still work on 20 different things. There could be 6 different new features. There could be 5 things around improving the durability and scalability and error freeness of your platform, etc. And so you could do any of these things. Your resource is really people and time. So it's like, what do you do with the people and the time that you have? And that requires just thinking about, well, how do we scale this? How do we reach more people? How do we think about your core metrics? Like, how do we engage people more? And everything you do is just from this very like, it tends to be more data driven. It tends to be like, what small little things like can we do with our people and our software that's going to drive the biggest result in our business, whether it's new customers are happier, customers stay longer, etc. So it's just a different way of thinking fundamentally about your business that I find. And I haven't found a lot of fitness companies that think about their businesses like software companies, which is why they're 2 different industries, right?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's also like that could be a helpful insight for like an up and comer who's building in the fitness space to be like, what company should I be looking at to learn from? And it may not be the ones that are like directly in your space. There might be room for you to like expand and your knowledge base, or maybe you might find opportunities or knowledge that introduce you to new, let's say like introduce you to a new way of looking at something or approach if you just step out of like only looking at companies in your sector, or in your very specific space. So that was interesting. I
Yeah.
appreciate you diving into that. Um, you
Do I
know,
get to
oh
do
yeah,
I get
yeah,
to
yeah,
give
yeah,
the 3
yeah,
other
yeah.
companies?
Please do,
Yeah,
please
yeah,
do.
because I'm quite excited about them too. The other 2 would be, there's 2 companies that are similar but also very different. So SoulCycle did something with fitness instructors where they made them, I got a thumbs up. They made them the heroes of the entire experience, and they built everything around them, and they kind of like made them the rock stars. The company was founded by at least one, I forget both the founder stories, at least one former talent agent from LA. And so they just had this different mindset. And I credit SoulCycle with creating, very much the whole boutique fitness boom.
100%.
To an extent. So, and then I'd lived in New York City for several years. I've been to many of the sort of classes in like the marquee studios and things, and just an amazing experience. Like just leading with like passion, talent, experience. They really worked out a killer formula. And even then, I mean, they sort of raised the profile of fitness instructors in general. I mean, if you look at how central fitness instructors are to Peloton success, like that whole mentality and idea kind of was, was evolved or borrowed in a way from SoulCycle, I would say.
Yeah,
Um,
their instructors essentially like influencers. They made their instructors essentially like famous, that people were coming from literally New York City to LA or LA to New York City just to see a specific instructor or to come to this instructor's class in Calabasas or in West Hollywood, but they live in
yeah,
the completely opposite side of the country. So that was very unique from them. Continue. Sorry.
yeah, and also to remind, this was way before fitness influencers were a thing. So yeah, the way it's evolved now with TikTok and Instagram, and how they've sort of, yeah, I don't see them as like an evolved business. They have an amazing business. It still works. It still runs, but it's not like a new thing. It's not growing. But for what they did at the time, very, very influential. Another company that's very much in the same space but has a very different approach to it is Orange Theory. So really, really appreciated my Orange Theory. Aside from the fact that the programming of the workouts are really interesting and really effective, the way that they integrate technology in it is really smart, and they did it in a way that is just like personally motivating, motivating as a group, and relatively simple and straightforward. Um, and then as a business, where SoulCycle had this very has this very like premium, and like Soul Cycles couldn't have 10 locations in Kansas City, for example, because there's only 5 instructors that maybe are their caliber or something. But you could have 5 Orange Theories in Kansas City,
And they
and
do.
and they do. So the way that they use technology to sort of help offload some of the what the instructor does, but then the instructors are also super amazing, super motivating people. They're a little bit less like front and center, but they're going around helping people out. One of my best friends from high school is a had been an Orange Theory instructor, by the way, and they have so much to offer as well. And then that company's like, whereas SoulCycle, I don't know the latest numbers, but I know SoulCycle was more like 100, maybe 150 locations across the world. And Orange Theory is like 1,000, 1,200, getting into those numbers across the world. So they just had something that's much more like scalable from that perspective. They have more of like a franchise business type mentality where they get a franchise owner, here's the playbook, open the business in your location, find great instructors. They don't have to be superstars, movie stars, but still find great people. So yeah, just even, and then the contrast of those two companies and how differently they operate, how differently they scale, I think is really admirable.
I want to ask you if you have any thoughts on Solid Core or if that's a business you've looked into at all. But as soon as you said Soul Cycle and Orange Theory, and you were mentioning, Soul Cycle is no longer evolving, but they still have a solid business. When we think about businesses that are, on the up and up and continuing to grow really fast and have that like, I don't like this word, but it's the only word I can think of right now, cult like energy, in
Yeah,
terms of, people really like falling from the skies to come in there. Solid
yeah,
Core comes to mind. And I know, hopefully one day I get to meet that founder. She was really dope. I've heard a lot of great interviews from her. But
yeah.
yeah, I think all those businesses are great. I I want to ask you what your thought is. So when we think about Peloton, and I can't say it's the same for um, the other companies you mentioned, but like Peloton was very well known for their bike, right? And for obviously amazing instructors and their virtual content, their digital content. What comes to your mind when you see companies like that like start trying a whole bunch of new products? Like, all right, we're releasing the treadmill. All right, we're releasing this. Okay, we're gonna try to, now we're attacking hotels and trying to like go into this space, or now we're gonna try to release this product. Now we're gonna come out with a massage gun, like whatever it might be. What comes to mind when you see that? Because like you're obviously have 1,000 times more experience than me, but like from me, just like looking at that, I'm like, all right. something must be going wrong inside of this business. Like, why they already have a product that's killing it and that everybody knows them for? Why are they trying to like try so many new different things within a year? But anyways, that's just like
Yeah,
a random thought that comes to my mind. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were.
yeah. I love this question. By the way, solid core definitely in the same breath as the others. I've done a few classes. I call it Soul Cycle of Pilates. It's great. But yeah, so Peloton doing different things. I actually think fundamentally it's not it's the right idea. It's the right way to grow. I've my first business, we started as sort of a classic strength training app, and then we saw all these different niches, and we branched out and found like a semi-scalable way to do it. So then we launched yoga apps and Pilates apps and CrossFit app. Um, so fundamentally, I don't think that's a bad strategy. I think just the way they executed, and I've given some Wall Street analyst calls on this or similar topics, but my point of view is that, and I've seen a lot of data on this. Fitness is a very trend different industry, and any of the major fitness brands, you can look this up on like Google Trends, things like CrossFit, Zumba, to an extent, Soul Cycle, Orange Theory, some of the ones we talked about. Almost everything that becomes like this cult sensation from a fitness, it's where a brand and a modality and a style, like almost a lifestyle, they're all sort of part of this fitness brand. So any of these major fitness brands emerge, they typically have a 10-year lifespan, and it looks like a pyramid as far as like the rise in popularity. It's very steep for 5 years, and then it's like an equivalently steep fall in popularity over the following 10 years. Every major fitness brand that has come out in the past, I mean, since Google Trends has had data, I think 2004 or something, I've seen follow this type of trend. Um, there are exceptions, like things like yoga, things like Pilates as general modalities don't follow this massive trend, but that's why it's different than like a brand and a cult like following brand. But all that said, um, sorry, back to your question was,
Yeah, just wondering like if you, from like your experience,
oh yeah.
yeah, see that as a negative or a positive, and yeah.
So that's where it comes to the tactics. So I think Peloton, they they have it. They have an it brand. That it brand is indoor cycling, and they tried to. I think the error was just tactically in trying to call everything else they were doing Peloton. That's with the strength training thing. That's the guy. That's with. I think they have a rowing machine that came out. The treadmill. Versus trying to come up with a new concept, a sub brand, an offshoot brand. I feel like, and it's not just like the brand name exactly, or like the style of the equipment for example, but it's just the whole thing. They try to kind of package up in the same way that they did for cycling, and it was such a hit for cycling. And even Peloton, the name of it is, that's what a group of cyclists cycling together is called. They just didn't do a good job of sort of coming up with alternative concepts and brands in a way that I think tends to be successful in the consumer fitness world.
Hmm, interesting. I think I'll probably make this the last question in this general area. But when we think about Peloton, what comes to my mind is why do you think, and I know there's no perfect answer to this, I'm just kind of wanting to hear your insights. Brands like and I don't even know if you'd call them brands because they don't have like a super strong brand, but you mentioned equipment, fitness equipment, right? So we think when I think treadmills, I think Woodway treadmills, I think the Matrix brand, I think Spirit treadmills when we think in home, Horizon when we think in home. These are all some treadmill brands that are out there. Or when we think about a large company that owns, like I think three of the brands I just mentioned, we have Johnson Fitness and Wellness or Johnson Health Tech that owns a whole bunch of different products in that ecosystem, right? How come these companies don't like branch off and like really go all in on brand and digital content and like, and they've tried, but why do you think they don't like put a lot of effort into like, all right, this is Woodway treadmill classes with our instructors, or this is our digital content that we've put and invested a lot of money and time into, like trying to create some type of buzz or energy around this. Do you feel like it's just like it's a waste of time? We're already killing it in by building this equipment and we already have like a business. Why test out in another area? But I just wondering what your thoughts are on that, because I'm just thinking about that over here. Like, why doesn't Woodway or Matrix treadmills or Horizon treadmills or some of these? Why don't they all like hire some fitness influencers to come create digital content for them and test out how to
Yeah.
build a brand on that side of things?
Yeah, that no, it's an interesting idea. Maybe I should take that to market as a consultant. Um, but no, I think it's possible, and I know there have been some efforts out there with some maybe moderate success. They may have not become like a Peloton household brand, but I my suspicion is that it kind of goes back to the similar thing I was saying before, how companies tend to have like a certain way of like a modus operandi. Like this is how a company thinks and operates. And the mindset of an equipment company is, and I've worked with some of his clients, um, it's sort of they're selling to typically like commercial real estate, commercial fitness clubs. They're selling B2B, and so the DNA of a company selling B2B is just that. You know, they have sales forces. They focus on relationships. They think and work in that way, sort of first. And the type of mentality it takes to create like a cult fitness brand. Like you see a lot of these founder-led brands, like the Soul Cycle founders were very, tight knit and hands-on. I forget her name, but I know the Solid Core founder. It was like a really, outspoken kind of a trainer themselves and a sort of leader in that way themselves. Um, the CrossFit, former
Oh yeah, for
CrossFit
sure.
founder CEO comes to mind. So these sort of like cult brands tend to be followed by like a very raw energy cult personality fitness person. And, that's typically not the type of executive leadership of a B2B, commercial sales organization company that also is very good at manufacturing operations, supply chain efficiency. Like there's so many things, capabilities to be good at in those types of businesses. And yeah, the sort of enigmatic, wild child, personality to lead a fitness cult following is typically not that.
Yeah,
Not
yeah,
not to say they couldn't do that or they couldn't sort of find the right pairing. I don't know. There was one of the equipment companies. Uh, I think that has the brand iFit. I forget the parent
yeah,
company.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't remember the pair. Nordic Trek, Nordic Trek.
Yeah, yeah. So I believe they acquired us. Kayla, it seems Sweat.
I was gonna bring her business up next. That was gonna be the next topic.
Yeah,
But
nice.
yes,
Yeah. So I would have maybe there was an attempt there, or that like that's the right idea. I don't know. I haven't heard anything new, special, different about anything with Sweat since that happened. So I don't really know what they've done with it. You could argue that the timing was maybe like late in that 10-year popularity wave of Sweat. But yeah, that's what I would say.
no, I love that. I love that. And I was just getting ready to bring her up because there's, I think, two more things I want to touch on. And then the tough thing about podcasts is they can't go on forever because I'm not Joe Rogan. But, but,
And
but, what I wanted to talk about is like for, you know, so this is really a kind of a selfish question as well. So I am a personal trainer in the personal training space. That's how I make my money. When I think about how am I going to grow my business, I'm thinking about like, okay, how can I scale in this area? Obviously, there's going to be a point where I can't train so many people in person. So then transitioning online, then trying to figure out how to get clients online. And then at a point, I'm going to have to get to a point where I can't have so many online clients because I can't manage that. So then what's after that? Oh, is it group fitness coaching? And then is it hiring other coaches? Blah, 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 blah. Right. And it goes down the line. So one thing somebody like Kayla or plenty of other, I shouldn't say plenty of other, but a few other successful fitness influencers or personal trainers have done is they've built a brand online, and then they've taking that brand away from, these homes like Facebook or these homes like Instagram or TikTok, and they've transferred them to their own audience on a separate app providing fitness workouts. And if at some point it gets to scale or their brand continues to grow, then they sell the business and cash out, right? So that's one area. Are there any other areas you feel like personal trainers should be thinking about, or people who are really into fitness and they just love working out, but they can't figure out quite yet how to like make the type of money they're looking to make, or how to scale, quote unquote, and they don't want to stick to just being an in-person trainer? Like, what are a few things that come to mind that you've seen work or that you think are interesting areas personal trainers should look into, so on and so forth?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I also have personal training certification through ACE, and my
Me
second
too.
business, nice, love those guys. My second, the second iteration of my first company, we did like a business model pivot. That one we were doing this model called hybrid personal training. It was sort of before it was really kind of more popular. But we had an in-person trainer. We required once a month in-person minimum, and then everything was through an app with your trainer from that. But that was so through that I got to work with I think 120 or some trainers that we sort of vetted and brought onto our team across 6 U.S. cities. I became a trainer. I trained people through the service. Just I wanted to have that firsthand experience building the product and using it on both sides. So anyway, have some knowledge and have had lots of conversations. Um, and it's not easy. Some of the ones I've seen do it the best have just maybe formed bands with other really smart seasoned trainers and maybe graduated through the ranks of Crunch Fitness or Equinox to have their own studio. That said, it's still limited. Yeah, you can run classes and have one-on-one sessions and do small group training, but you're sort of capped as far as like how many people you can serve and just by your own energy and by the in-person nature of it. Um, there are these online platforms. There's all these things you mentioned. I still believe that it's the type of thing. It's very un. Um, it's hard to measure. It's hard to like put in X effort and get Y out. There's a lot of risk involved, and it seems like the kind of thing like for every one Brett Contreras that you read about, there's like I don't know 1,000 or 10,000 that try it and just lost momentum or didn't get whatever the traction or didn't have the whatever it was. So it is a challenging space. The thing that comes to mind is for me is like going to like reaching out and talking with companies, finding companies that are tech companies, that are fitness companies, equipment companies that, some of these things we talked about, like they could use these sorts of collaborations, whether it's just people promoting their products, people for content shoots, people to come up with like programming ideas for them to sort of spread as a company. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. So just reaching out proactively to companies. There's lots of programs that some companies have defined, like I think Nike has a set of sort of like Nike trainers, and I know Lululemon has like a fantastic set of I forget the word they use, like influencers or
Yeah.
whatever they call them.
Alo blowing up in Los Angeles right now and has a few, top trainers or influence. I'm not saying they're not top trainers, but
Yeah,
influencers who are also trainers under the Alo brand. Yes.
yeah. So being able to, you know, whether it's a formal defined program or whether you're just like networking your way into a big equipment company, for example, could be a way to just partner with other sets of resources that are substantial and allow you to sort of have a broader, a bigger, taller, broader platform from which you can do what you do through your action, through your brain, through your body, as a fitness professional.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for answering that. Okay, so this will be like our little just random round of just random questions slash opinions, right? So I think there's a lot of cool things going on right now in the world, also a lot of trends and things of that nature. So I just kind of want to see basically this is your opinion on, and then I'm just going to mention something. So your opinion on running clubs and, them blowing up and taking over cities and becoming the new way to date.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get off the dating app soon. So, but I I was actually I've been complaining to friends about this recently. Is I need a running club for night owls because it seems like they're all organized by these early morning birds and they all start at like 6 a.m. or 8 a.m. And I'm just like, I want a running club, but at the end of the day, not getting up early. It's just like not personally not my best energy.
Slight plug, if you ever happen to move back to Santa Monica, we started a run club here in Sawtell. Thursdays 6 p.m. and Sundays 10 a.m. So a little bit later if you happen to move back this way. If you happen to move back this way.
That sounds like my vibe.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Let's do companies that are leveraging. This is happening a lot, but I'll give you one or two right now. Let me ask you, do you know anything about Cadence? Are you familiar with Cadence, the salt drink that is coming out, or the beverage where it's like salt and something else? But yeah, Cadence. Have you heard of that?
I
Okay,
think I've heard of it, but don't nothing much.
got you. So um, there's a company right now called Represent. It's in the fashion streetwear space. Very very popular amongst the young folks. The one of the founders, George Heaton, super big fitness enthusiast. Like they film a lot of content called like Behind the Brand, which is like a little bit of content about like literally behind the brand, like them going to factories in Turkey and Istanbul and stuff, and like showing how they're building out these fashion outfits and stuff like that. And then the other half of it is them literally running like 15 miles and getting huge, big lifts in and training for the Berlin Marathon or training for high rocks, things of that nature.
Nice.
And so they built like a big following of like young people who really care about fitness in that space, who also support the Represent streetwear fashion side of things,
Hmm.
but also care a lot about fitness. So they launched a secondary part of their business, which was workout apparel called 247.
Hmm.
And that's been doing really well. They've been sponsoring a whole bunch of athletes that are running like different marathons, triathletes, different things of that nature. Um, and then now he and the former founder of Daring Foods, Ross McKay or Mackey, Ross Mackey,
Hmm.
have teamed up with like both of their brands of like shooting YouTube content, Instagram content around fitness and like them preparing for marathons and things of that nature. And they launched a
Cool.
brand called Cadence, which is like a hydration drink. Basically, their claim is that people aren't focused enough on hydration, and the salt is a really important aspect of hydration,
Hmm.
staying hydrated for runs. So they launched a brand called Cadence, which they're now, they're doing all these pop-ups at different pop-up run clubs at their stores, pop-up run clubs or pop-up runs at the New York City Marathon that's coming up. They're there handing out their Cadence packs and drinks and
Nice.
everything. So like with that concept in mind, utilizing YouTube, utilizing Instagram to share content around health and fitness to build a following to then sell a product. Like, do you have any like pet peeves about people who go that route, if that makes sense? I don't know if pet peeves is the right word, but anything where you're like, like here goes another person that's a big influencer that knows nothing about it. Not saying those guys are this way, but
Yeah.
I know it's not a super direct question, but any thoughts you have off of what I just said?
Yeah. No, I think in general, it's if generally talking about like going marketing channels with influencer marketing and event based market, I don't know, just it seems like the way of the world. This is where people are putting their time and attention. This is where influence is happening. And on the whole, at a high level, like this is what your marketing strategy should be for a modern company that's looking to, get an edge, outcompete maybe over some incumbents, like I don't know, the Gatorades of the world, things of that nature. I think it's smart. Uh, Again, it kind of how you do it comes down to tactics. If it's like well done, tasteful, or if you're just like kind of I don't know what the word is. I was going to say carpet bombing, but like influencer bombing, content bombing, a bunch of influencers who don't really care and just paying them a bunch of money so they'll do whatever you say. I mean, there becomes like an integrity issue on both sides. So I one person I've admired for many years is Tim Ferriss, another major, influencer of the podcast movement in general. But What I like about him is he promotes things, but he does things that align with his ethos for the most part, and he seems to have pretty solid integrity around that. So I think if you do it in that way, where someone is someone's about something as an individual, as an influencer, and if you have a brand that speaks to what that person is about, and you guys do a collab, and there's like authentic interests and mutual benefit there, I think those can be some of the most effective marketing you could ever imagine. If it's forced and paid, and there's ways it can go wrong, I would say as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is the one thing I really appreciate about like Cadence or 247 and what those two founders, George Heaton and Ross, are doing is like they're the influencer, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Like they're
yeah,
they're builders and they've already proved that they can build like in a massive company. And now they've just prioritized like health and fitness and happen to be very good at it and are like, all right, well, let's get some content. Like we're the influencers for the brands that we're trying to build or for the companies we're trying to build. I don't know who said it, but somebody said it. I feel like it was Toby Pierce, who I think was a part of Sweat, or maybe it was another company that sold with the
mm.
same thing where his girlfriend was like the main influence. I think it was Sweat. I think
I
they
think
used to
that's
do,
the yeah,
yeah, yeah.
that's the name. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think he might have said it, but anyways, it was just CEOs are becoming the athletes and athletes are becoming CEOs. And I just thought that
Mm.
was funny, like a funny way to think about it in terms of like what we're seeing and what we're going to continue to see in terms of like, okay, like we're gonna see CEOs like the two guys I just mentioned who are like they're known for the founding businesses and building businesses, but health and fitness is becoming super popular, and we're gonna see these individuals like, oh, I'm gonna do a triathlon, I'm gonna do a marathon, I'm gonna become a bodybuilder, I'm gonna compete in CrossFit, like whatever it is. I'm gonna go compete in these high rocks competitions, and become big from
Yeah.
that. And then on the flip side, we're gonna see people like Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Charles Barkley start launching companies that do really well simply because of it might be a good product, but it's really just generating the attention because they're the athletes. So, anyways, just a fun way to think about it.
No, no, I love that, and I'm definitely going to follow those two founders. I love that ethos, and there's something a little more from like the tech Silicon Valley world that brought up to me, which is that well, not quite as current as founder mode, but just shortly after before that, it was sort of this like founder led marketing concept. So there's a lot of founder led marketing companies and startups being a new thing. So I think there's a nice alignment there.
100%, which is like what I feel. I feel like I first heard that from just like seeing so many people, what do they say, build in public, but on Twitter, like doing these
Mm,
huge, just like every week releasing a thread on a certain topic or talking
mm.
about like their business and what they're building and like it gets 1,000 retweets now, 1,000 new people know about your business. I feel like that's the first time I heard that concept, or at least felt like it was put into action, but I'm sure it happened before that. But
Nice.
no. Final one of the random opinions. I would love to hear your opinion, or if you are familiar with High Rocks
Yeah.
and the brand that is taking over the world in the fitness space, replacing CrossFit. I would go so far to say.
Yeah, love High Rock's very interesting one. It's a company I was recently trying to get in touch with. I was over in Germany, and the founders is from Hamburg, which is also an interesting, unlikely one given its rising popularity in places like New York and LA. Yeah, just kind of tuned into High Rocks in the past 4 or 5 months. Really exciting what they're doing, kind of combining the say CrossFit styles of training, which is aggressive and it feels a bit more like sports. There's scoring, there's competition, with you know races and event sort of the fitness event space, marathon, triathlon type events, and just the rising popularity. You mentioned sort of the bit of the opportunity left open by CrossFit. CrossFit is still a thing. I don't think it's not gonna be in our headspace. It's been so influential in the industry, just the way that people training methodology, and people still love it. I still love dropping in to CrossFit sessions to just really push myself every now and again. But yeah, CrossFit or High Rocks is sort of taking up some of the slack where they haven't maybe continued to innovate. And speaking to people, yeah, I've seen a couple of High Rocks workouts and seen some of their flags up next to or on top of the CrossFit flags at some of the boxes, but
Yeah.
it's I haven't been in one yet, so that's another one I got to add to my list.
Hey, well, if I can ever convince you, maybe we do a High Rocks doubles competition. You, me, we take over the High Rocks competition somewhere in some city in America. I don't know if I'm gonna come
Sounds
to
fun.
Vancouver, but but no, Nick, I really appreciate you making time today. You gave us more time than we even planned on. It's been a great conversation, and I definitely look forward to giving it some space, but definitely reaching out to you in a few months to do another episode. There's so many other things I want to ask you about. I think the good thing about this conversation is there's the alignment around the career path that I'm in and my passions and interests along with what you've built and what you're passionate and interesting about. So I haven't been able to have a conversation with somebody who has built and operated in the I don't know if you refer to it as this, but the health and fitness ecosystem. So
Yeah.
next time I'd love to continue these conversations and just ideate on different topics and learn more about the businesses you're building. What is the best way for people to follow you, keep up with you? Is there anything that you want the audience to know? Yeah, just plug away and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just really enjoyed the conversation as well. The topics are so fun, and they're topics that I get asked, on occasion here and there, but never do I get a chance to kind of hit them all at once in one sit down. So it's really fun. Carlos, thanks for that. Yeah, I'm a couple things I'm building right now. So my current consultancy, we're called Next Epic. We serve health and fitness companies, anything from $1 billion company on down to a tech startup that has some fitness aspect to their business. So we're really expert at designing and building custom software experiences, lots of workout apps, fitness apps, Apple Watch apps, connected experiences in studios, things like that. So anything, any entrepreneur or business owner needs any help on that, on their fitness tech, let me know. Also excited about a project that's relaunching soon, which is my first company, Gain Fitness. We've got an app relaunching soon. So that'll be available in App Store. We're hoping as close to January 1st as humanly possible.
Let's go.
Yeah, yeah. So lots of exciting things going on. We're starting to build some AI based projects, kind of jumping into the data and recommendations and machine learning and all that fun stuff. So playing a lot in that space, and but yeah, still trying to stay, close to the roots of fitness industry, which still comes from great charismatic fitness leaders and physical fitness spaces where people can get together and do the thing. So that's why I love this industry. Is it's so multifaceted between the technology, the influence, the motivation, the physical space, the actual workout, the programming, the leadership. So I will keep at it. LinkedIn is a good place to find me on any of these things, or gainfitness.com. We'll have some new stuff up there soon.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Nick. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you guys plug yourselves in with Nick, connect with them on LinkedIn, especially my fellow listeners who are in the health and fitness industry. There's so much I'm sure you've learned during this conversation, but can continue to learn if you make the effort to go connect with Nick on his website or email him or connect with them on LinkedIn. There's always more opportunities to learn and hopefully build something with them. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, Voices of Value podcast. I don't even remember what episode this is, to be honest with you guys, but somewhere in the 200s. So thank you, Nick, for being here today. And I look forward to chatting with you again.
Thank you, Carlos.